Hello out there, everyone who is either using a Steam Deck or aspiring to use a Steam Deck. This video is basically going to cover how to set up a firewall on your Steam Deck. Because if you're like me and you are using a Steam Deck or interested in using a Steam Deck and have noticed that the Steam Deck is woefully inadequate when it comes to your security sometimes, particularly in the reality in which it does not ship a firewall by default on SteamOS, then you might be interested in trying to figure out how to run your own firewall. Now, if you're not aware of what a firewall actually is or does, I'll be covering that briefly throughout the video. I'll also give you a brief demonstration on how to use a firewall, how to configure it, and if you are concerned that this is going to be difficult, don't be. It's actually rather easy. It's not that hard to do at all. I am, however, going to make a couple of assumptions about you as a person before we get into this video. So the first assumption is that you have watched the prerequisite video for this, which was the video that I did just before this one about configuring Pacman to install packages using GPG keys and all that. That is a prerequisite to this video. If you have not done that yet, you will need to do that. So please go watch that video first. It's like 7 minutes. It's not that bad. Also, you will need to have a password set up on your account. If you don't have that already, so that you can elevate to root, then go watch my first video. The instructions for how to do that are in there. I'll put a link to that in the description, and I'll probably put some cards or something around that will give you a link to it right within this video. But it is a prerequisite. You do need to do it. If you don't set that up, then you might not be able to complete this video portion correctly. I also want to let you know that at the end of this video, I'm going to demonstrate a little script that I've written that will automate the process of installing this for you. Not because I want to make it easier for you to do your initial install, although you could use it that way, but I also want to make it so that if your Steam Deck gets an update, say as of the time of this video, 3.5 is not released and stable yet. When 3.5 becomes SteamOS 3.5 becomes stable, it's going to probably clobber the root file system, which is going to break your firewall. Don't worry, it won't break your Steam Deck or anything like that, but it will leave your firewall in an unusable state. So to compensate for that, I have created a script that you can run either from your Linux desktop, as you see here, or from game mode even. You can launch and run the script from game mode, and it'll work just fine and fix your firewall for you. So what to do now? Where to start? Well, again, make sure that you've watched that first video and followed the instructions there. If you have, then we can begin. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to disable our read-only flag on our operating system if we have that enabled. So we're just going to run sudo steamos read-only disable, just like that. And we're going to put that password in that we set up in the first video that we watched. And you should see that you are either in read-write mode, as I was already because of a prior take on the video, or you'll see that you're in read-only mode and probably get either no output or a you did it kind of output. Either way, you should be successfully in read-write mode once you're done. Next, we're going to go ahead and do the installation. It will require exactly 2 packages, and that's it. It's actually pretty trivial. So what you're going to do is you're going to do sudo and then pacman -syu, capital S, lowercase yu, space nftables, space firewall D. That's it. All you need to do is put that command in and press enter. And you'll notice that it will run through a little installation process. And in my case, it's going to say reinstalling. In your case, it's going to say installing. It's going to ask you if you want to proceed with the installation. You can either leave that blank and press enter because the Y is capital in the YN there. Or you can put a Y in or enter the letter Y and then press enter. You do not need to put a capital Y, although you can. But the capital Y just means it's the default option. It does not mean that you have to put a capital Y in order for it to work. So Just enter the letter Y or leave it blank and press enter, and it should install the 2 packages for you. You are done now at this point. Your firewall is installed, however, it is not configured. Your firewall isn't going to do you a bit of good right now because it's not technically running. So let's go ahead and fix that. We're going to do sudo systemctl, and we're going to do enable, first of all, firewall D, just like that. Okay? Now, what this is going to do is it's going to make it so that your firewall D application will start on boot. Okay, so when you boot your system up, you're going to get firewall D. All right, so do that, and then do sudo systemctl, and then start firewall D, just like that. That will actually start the service. Enable will enable it so when you reboot your system, it comes back up automatically, but it's not going to start it. You need to actually do the start command after that in order to actually start it now. Okay, now this is the point where I should probably tell you that your Plasma desktop, which is the KDE interface, desktop interface here, all this stuff, it actually ships with a firewall option in it, but it's broken because while the front end is sort of there, the back end is not. You need NF tables to make use of that. The reason why I tell you to use Firewall D is because it is just objectively better than what ships with KDE, so just use the Firewall D application. It's infinitely better. It's what I highly recommend. There's also a competing one called UFD, or Uncomplicated Firewall Daemon, or UFW, Uncomplicated Firewall. I prefer Firewall D. You can experiment with the other. This video will cover Firewall D. So at this point, your firewall's up, your firewall's running, you are technically protected. Whether you're in game mode or you're in normal mode, desktop mode, or whatever, your firewall will run. That's what the enable firewall D did. It made it so that whenever your Steam Deck comes on in the background, your firewall will be there and protecting you. However, if you do more with your Steam Deck than just play video games or play video games online through online servers, which your firewall's not going to hinder at all, if you do things like run, I don't know, Quake 2 with the, with the Quake 2 flat package, and you want to run or host local games that other people are going to connect to on your Steam Deck, then your firewall is going to block that. If you want to use KDE Connect on your network, which I recommend you check out, KDE Connect is pretty boss, your firewall is absolutely going to stop you from doing that. Now, the good news is we can make exceptions in our firewall to fix that. So let me go ahead and start demonstrating what the actual firewall is. So I'm going to switch to another desktop here because I have 4 configured. So we'll go to this blank one. And I'm going to go to my start or main menu. Start menu if you're coming from Windows. Main menu if you're from anything else. And then I'm going to come up here to my search. Now you can see I've already got my firewall down there in my favorites, but I'm going to show you how to find it, just in case you don't. So you're just going to go to Firewall, and you're going to see here that you have 2 of them. One will say Configure Your Network Rules. That is not the one you want. That's the one that ships with Plasma. And you'll know you picked the wrong one because your interface will look very primitive by comparison, okay? So you're going to choose the other one that just says Firewall Configuration underneath it. Firewall Configuration. Click that guy, and you should get an interface that looks similar to what you see on my screen here. It's going to prompt you for a password. That will be the password that we gave it before when we were installing stuff, the same one you set up on your account. And now you're going to get this rather intimidating looking window. Don't worry, it's not that bad, and I'm going to go ahead and describe everything for you here so that you understand what's going on. Okay, so first and foremost, let's draw our attention up here to the configuration drop-down. All right, so you're going to notice currently it says runtime. Runtime means basically that it only works for the duration of this session on your computer. If you reboot your computer, or in this case your Steam Deck, or if your Firewall D daemon stops and starts again for whatever reason, your firewall configurations will be lost. So if you want them to be permanent, you need to actually switch it to permanent. If you're in permanent mode, then your configuration changes will survive a reboot. So why even have the runtime one? Well, runtime is good for testing. So if you know you only want a certain rule in there for a short period of time, say you're not positive if it's going to work, or you're worried because you're messing with an SSH rule and you can't get back into your system if you break things, having a way to just reboot the computer and have that rule go away might not be such a bad idea. But for the most part, generally speaking, you're probably going to want to keep your rules permanent if you know what you're doing, or you're doing something that doesn't involve something that's going to prevent you from logging into the PC. So that is those two. That is the gist of those two settings. I normally will edit in runtime, see if it works, and then change it to permanent, and make my configuration changes permanent that way. I think there is actually an option where you can, runtime to permanent. So if you do options and then runtime to permanent, it will actually switch your runtime options over to permanent options for you. So if you do your testing and realize, yes, this is good, then you can actually hit that button instead of switching to permanent, and it should make it permanent for you. And that's a good way to test without worrying about breaking your system, because if you break it, you can just reboot and everything will be back to normal. Now, let's go ahead and talk about this little section here. Okay, so this over here is your connections, and you're going to notice some light blurring in this section because I don't want to, it's giving away SSIDs for my network, so you guys can't have that, sorry. But over here, you're going to see that there are some zones, I guess is what they're called. And we're on the Zones tab, by the way. So if you click Zones up here, which should be the default tab that you're on, you'll see these particular items here. These are your zones that you have. Now, what are zones? Zones are a way to apply different network, firewall configurations to different network interfaces on your system. So let's say you have a Wi-Fi network at your house that you trust, and you want to listen for KDE Connect, and you want to host video games and do all kinds of cool stuff. Well, you can configure that in your home zone, and then if you go to another friend's house or an airport or a hotel, you don't have to worry about that home zone being enabled, because it will automatically switch over to the public network by default, public being the most restricted normally. That should be your default as public. And so what you need to understand about this is that this gives you the power to configure your firewall to handle a multitude of different situations, whatever you want them to sort of handle, right? And it happens automatically in the background. So you don't have to go in here and constantly check and recheck boxes depending on what network you're connected to. And that is why this particular application is so much more powerful than other ones that you might see. Zones is a very important feature, and you're going to want to have that, especially on computers that travel around, like laptops and, I don't know, Steam Decks. So that's that. We'll talk more about how to assign zones to a particular network interface at the more towards the end of the video, so we're going to circle back to that. But let's move on now and talk about services. So for this, we're going to switch over to our home zone, and we're going to come down here and we're going to scroll down, and here we can find a service that we might want to enable, and you'll notice there are some that have checkboxes in them. So let's say, for instance, we want to enable the KDE Connect service. You'll see mine's already enabled. You would scroll down to KDE Connect and you would simply click on the checkbox, and it will enable KDE Connect for you, and that will get you going on that particular service. So basically, you're just going to scroll down until you see the service that you want, and then you can check the box next to it, and that's that. You're good. You're enabled for that particular zone. Now remember, that's specific to the zone and specific to whether or not you're permanent or runtime. Okay. So, what if you don't see an item in this list? Let's say you want to play Quake 2 on a network and you want people to be able to join your session on your Steam Deck. Now, you obviously don't need to make the rule happen if you're joining their session, because then you're reaching out to them, and loopback or an established connection should already come through. You shouldn't need to worry about established connections. So you don't need to allow connections that you are requesting outbound, right? So if I connect to their Quake 2 server, I don't need to allow the packets back in because it's a related and established connection, and by default, that should be good. This is why you can enable this firewall and still browse the internet, because those are related and established connections. Your computer requested those packets, and so it's okay for them to come back through the firewall. It is technically possible to block those packets too, but it's not configured that way by default using Firewall D. Okay, so this means that you only need to pay attention to services that you host on your Steam Deck that you want other people to connect to. you're running the server on your Steam Deck for Quake 2, and you expect clients to connect to your Steam Deck. You're going to come through here, and you're going to look for Quake 2. And you'll actually see it on mine, I think, because I added it. But if it's not there for you, and we're going to pretend like it's not, what you're going to do is come up here to Services. And in Services, you'll notice that list of services looks awfully familiar here, right? And you'll see that we have a list of services. And what you can do is you can come over here and you can click this little plus button, and it will give you a new service. And in here, you can give it a name, you can give it a description, you can give it a version if you want, or a short name. It's kind of irrelevant. None of this stuff really matters. It's just how you can identify that service later. So I recommend that you make at least the name relevant to what you're doing. In my case, I named it Quake 2. And you can see here, I'm actually needing to elevate real quick to mess with it, but that's okay. So in here, you can see that I've added port 27910, and then I've added 45135, and both of those are at UDP. The way I found that out is I basically Googled Quake 2 to see what ports needed to be enabled, and those two came back as what needed to be enabled. The other thing you can do, although it's slightly less reliable than Googling these things sometimes, just going to the manufacturer's page and saying, hey, I need these particular ports enabled, you can also come back to your terminal and you can use ss, and you should probably use sudo, and then ss minus tuplen, and this will actually give you an output of everything that's listening on your computer. So you can look for items like this. This is port 000, or this is IP address 0000, which means it's all IP addresses, and it's a service that is listening at port 5355. You can probably ignore the loopback IP ones. That's these 127.0.0.1s. But if you see 0.0.0.0 or one that looks like the IP address of the machine you're on, then that port is listening on something that is external and can receive connections if your firewall allows it through. So this is another way where you can check what's listening on your PC. Now, of course, if you start Quake 2 up and you don't have the server running yet, then obviously it's not going to be listening. And sometimes it needs more ports than are immediately there. Sometimes certain applications will work in a way where you establish a connection to a particular port, and then the machine starts, and then the application opens another port to listen on, and it's got to have that port as well. So sometimes there's an actual group of ports, and that's why it can be easier to just simply Google what ports you need. So try the Google method first and search for the application that you're looking for and check the ports that way. You can also use ss minus tuplen in order to get a list of the services on your system and what ports are listening on. Tuplen basically is a big long string of switches that I normally use. It's sort of the universal command that I prefer. There are a couple of other ones you can use, or you can go to the man pages on a different computer besides the Steam Deck, because the Steam Deck doesn't appear to have the man pages. But if you go to man pages or Google that command, you can look up what each individual switch does. I think T is TCP IP, U is UDP, or T is TCP, U is UDP. They all have different things that they enable you to see in there. So you can play with that, enabling and disabling various letters and see what they do. But anyway, once you create your service here and you're ready to use it, you can switch back over to zones, and you should see it in this list of services now. If you don't see it immediately in the list of services, I know in past versions of Firewall D, I've had to basically close this little app down and then open it again in order to see it appear in there. So if you don't see it immediately, try doing that. You might also notice that there are some other tabs over on this side. So if you just do ports over here, you can just blanketly enable ports without setting up a special service for it. The problem with this is that you just have the port there, and that's really it. And what that means is that you don't get a lot of context for what it is. So for instance, you can add the port and you'll basically get your port range and then your protocol. Your port range can be like 1 and then dash and then 5, and it'll do ports 1 through 5. That's just an example. Don't use that. But you can do a range like that, or you can do a single port, and then you can switch between TCP or UDP. Chances are you just want TCP or UDP. There are other protocols there too, but you'll probably want TCP and or UDP. If you want to do both, you'll need to create a new item for both. So you'll need to enable the port at TCP and then make a new one, and then basically hit the add button again, and then enable it for UDP as well. Okay, so that is the ports column. I definitely recommend you create services and add them to your services tab instead. But if you want to do something quick and dirty, you can via the ports tab. Masquerading allows your device to act basically as a router and assume IP addresses of the devices connecting to it. So basically it makes your Steam Deck work like a router. You're not really going to ever use that, but if you ever do decide to, for whatever reason, if you're doing that for some crazy reason, you can Google how to use Masquerade and Firewall D. I don't typically do that. Usually if I'm setting up a Masquerade, I'm doing it straight through NF tables or IP tables. Speaking of NF tables, what is NF tables about? Well, Firewall D is actually a wrapper for NF tables. NF tables, or NFT, not to be confused with non-fungible tokens, NF tables, or net filter tables, is what the firewall really is. It's what's actually doing the firewall work. It's the kernel module and everything that you need to actually make it happen. Firewall D is a fancy little wrapper that gives us some extra features like zones and, just gives you the pretty GUI and all that stuff. Speaking of the GUI, Firewall D does have a command line interface as well. I believe it's Firewall D-CMD, if I'm not mistaken. I don't often use it because when I'm doing CLI stuff, I normally just use NF tables by itself. And then I use Firewall D when I'm using like a graphical system, say a laptop or a desktop or something portable that I want to take to different houses or whatever. If I'm working on a server that doesn't have a graphical interface, I generally just stick to net filter tables. Normally, those systems aren't going to move network to network anyway, so it doesn't matter as much having different zones. And speaking of zones, let's go ahead and talk about how to handle your zones and how to actually connect your service or your network interface to your zones. So, as I said, over here you have a list of zones, and you can even make new zones with the plus sign here, or edit one, or delete one if you want, I guess. But I think you can only delete ones you've actually created, not ones that you have actually, not any of the default ones. I think the default ones have to be there. But if you wanted to create like a zone for your friend's house or something, if you wanted to specifically allow a handful of things for your friend's network, right, you could do that. Generally, I just use my home zone and then my public zone. That's it. So my home zone is when I'm on my home network. My public zone is for anything else. I don't trust networks that are not my home network. That's just the way it is. And I would recommend that you do the same. Okay, so let's go ahead and configure our network interface for that. So to do that, we're going to open this dialog, and we can get to this dialog very easily, either by opening our system settings and then going to connections, or by simply right-clicking on our network interface down here, right-click it and do configure network connections, and it'll bring up this dialog. Now, as you can see here, you're going to see a lot of blurring up here, but you can see that I've created this demo connection here for you guys to sort of see how this works. Now, what you're going to do here is click on this connection after you've created it with the plus sign, or you can select your home network from your Wi-Fi selection or whatever you need. And then what you can do is you can see that there are a couple of tabs here. You got IPv4, configuring your IPv4 network connections, your IPv6 network connections. You can set up your Wi-Fi security, so that's if you do WPA2, WPA3, that kind of stuff. Here you can set your SSID, BSSID, all that stuff. That stuff is probably already done for you when you connect it to your network, so you probably don't have to worry about all that. What I do want to call your attention to is this general configuration tab, because if you look down here, you'll notice there is this lovely little drop down built right into your network manager called Firewall Zone. And in here, we can select a different firewall zone to be in. So if we want to make this demo our home zone, for instance, we can select that and click apply. And now whenever we connect to this demo network, we will be in our home zone. If we go back to our firewall, you can see here on this connections section here, which will be blurred for you, but you can see this zone underneath is selected for home here. You can also change that zone by clicking this, and then you can do change zone, but that'll just be for this one runtime. That's not going to change it permanently as far as I'm aware. So what you really want to do is go into that network manager setup and select that from the drop down in that dialog, and that will make it permanent so that whenever you connect to that connection from now on, whenever you use that connection going forward, basically, it will be in that particular zone. And so now whenever I'm connected to demo, I have all of the firewall restrictions and allowances that are in the home zone. So make sure when you're setting up your services, you have the correct zone selected. That's very important. You don't want to allow stuff in zones you're not intending to allow it in, especially in public. Public should basically have nothing allowed, pretty much ever. I think they do have SSH here, which you don't generally want. So maybe uncheck that. I think that's on by default. And then, I don't know, I've gone through here and maybe messed with some stuff because I was doing takes on this video, so I'm not sure what all I have selected. But basically speaking, nothing in here should generally be selected. I think IPv6 client maybe. Generally, you don't want anything coming in on your public network because it's public and you don't want anything coming through that. Basically, if you go to a hotel and you connect to the hotel Wi-Fi, think about what you would want the hotel to know about you. If that's anything more than nothing, you're doing it wrong. Okay? So public should probably have nothing checked. If you notice something doesn't work, maybe go back in and check whatever it was you disabled, so take note of it. But you can also do change default zone. So this is where you can select what zone you're in by default. That should be public. And that's that. You could also, if you want, instead of messing with public, you could make a new zone. So you could actually click your plus here and then make a zone and then make that your default zone if you prefer. But generally speaking, public is the most restrictive. And in my opinion, is probably what you should go ahead and use. But, you know, it's your firewall. Feel it out. As long as you're more secure than you were before, I've done my job. The last thing we're going to want to do is, now that we have our firewall properly configured at this point, we're going to go back over to our terminal and we're going to re-enable our read-only. So sudo system, or not system, I'm sorry, Steam OS read-only, and instead of disable, we're going to simply put enable. And that's it. We'll be read-only if we enter our thing. I may have fat-fingered that. I did. That's fine. There we go. And boom. So if you get no output, you're good. And that's it. That's it. Congratulations. You now have a firewall. The last thing I'm going to show you about this is that script that I promised I'd talk to you about. So let's talk about the script. So for that, I've made a paste bin. I'll put a link to that in the description, so please check that. But I want to go over the specifics of this script with you because it's important that you understand what you're using. You don't ever want to copy and paste something from the internet blindly without understanding it. And also, this script is going to get adjusted over time as I do more videos. I'm going to add more to this script. Because this is a script I call custom install fix. And so what this actually does is you run this after your computer or your Steam Deck, I guess, gets updated from, you know, SteamOS, gets a SteamOS update. So once you go to 3.5 as of this recording, basically you'll run this script and it will fix it for you. So if you you're going to want to copy and paste everything in this section, but to give you a brief overview of what everything does, these are just safety things. They make it so that errors are traceable, make it so that it can't clobber stuff in the script, so you can't overwrite files. You know, pipe fail means if a piped error, you know, occurs, it fails the script instead of allowing it to succeed. I do want to enable error exit, but there's an exception that I need to put in, so I haven't enabled it right now, but I do have it commented out. If you guys want to mess with that, you can, but just be warned that the script will break if you enable that in its current configuration because it relies on an error to work, and if that errors the script out entirely, so the script fails, then it's just going to bail out when the error happens. So that's why that's commented out like that. So this actually will prompt you to become root if you're not already root, and that line right there is what's going to allow this script to work basically from your Steam Deck's game mode. Without that line, you wouldn't be able to become root from game mode, and it wouldn't allow the script to function. So you can take note of that if you want to have your own scripts that you want to write and have them be able to run from game mode if they require root to function. That will allow it to elevate to root. And what's cool about this is it will prompt you in the terminal, and you can tap the terminal, and it will prompt you if you want that to work as root. And so now we can go down to this bit, and this bit here will check if root succeeded. So basically, if you fat finger your password too many times, we don't want the script to just continue on blindly. So basically, if you're not root, it will bail out and say it didn't become root successfully. This is going to disable your read-only flag for you in line with the script, so you don't need to worry about doing that ahead of time. It's good to go. And everything above that line is required, so you have to put that in there, all right? Everything below this, up to a certain point, will be optional, and I'll put that sort of in these little sections here. You'll see optional. Now, you're going to want at least one optional section, but there's going to be, at the end of all my videos here, probably 3 different sections. You're going to need at least one for this script to even do anything. Otherwise, it's not really going to do a lot. But these sections will be optional once you select the one or more that you want. This one is going to be important for Firewall daemon. So this right here is going to check if your Firewall D is actually installed. I tried to do this in line with the if statement, but it kept erroring out and didn't behave correctly. So instead I put it on this line, set the output to dev null, and then just checked if an error occurred on the preceding line, which is what this if statement does, and that allows things to continue appropriately. I might try to tweak that to make it a little cleaner at a later date, but for now that's doing the job. Here basically we are determining that the firewall is installed, and we're going to skip everything and just bail out basically on this part. But if it is not installed, we're going to come down here and we're going to output this message, and then we're going to remove these files to clean up. So if these files are there, it will remove them. Otherwise, it will just say error, file doesn't exist, or whatever. And then down here, it's going to install our Firewall D and NF tables daemons and kernel modules, respectively. And it's going to do it with no confirm, which basically means it's going to automatically do it. You can probably add the YU here if you like, but I just went with the S for now. And then it's going to echo that it's succeeded. And I have tested this several times. This works fine. Down here at the bottom, you're going to want to copy these in regardless of the options that you choose above. Again, right now there's only one option above, so choose it if you're watching this video. The other options will be relevant to future videos that I'll be doing, and I'll point them out in those videos specifically. So this is going to re-enable your read-only flag for you automatically, so you don't have to worry about it. And this is going to wait for you to push enter before it kills the script off. And what that's going to do is it's going to allow you to see the output of the script to make sure things work, to see if there were any errors or issues or anything like that. And that's it. The script will work at this point. The other thing we can do here is I can flip open this guy, and we can go into, let me pop this open here. Oop, that is the wrong thing. Not what I wanted. Instead, I want this. So we can go into .local, and then if you don't have it in here, make your bin file. .local is a hidden folder. I should probably show you how to do that. So if you come over here and you right-click on your toolbar up here, you can go into Configure Toolbars, and then in here you can search for different toolbar icons that you might want. One of them will be Show Hidden Files, which will be this guy here. And you'll just click it, you'll click on it from over here, and then you'll click this little arrow to bring it over on this side. You can place it anywhere in here that you want, however you prefer to arrange your toolbar. I'll go into more depth on how to do this kind of stuff in a different video, but I wanted you to see at least how to enable the hidden files one, because now you'll get this little neat toggle here where you can actually toggle your hidden folders, and then you can just click on your local folder if you like. What I tend to do though is I'll go back into there and I'll add my terminal over here, and then I'll have a terminal that I can use to simply manipulate where I'm at in my file system, because that's my preference. Now in here again, you're going to want to make your directory for your bin if you don't already have it. In my case, it's already there, so I don't need to worry about it. And then you can go into that bin directory. And in here, you'll notice I've got quite a few little scripts that I've written from time to time. Yes, I'm experimenting with KDE and Wayland just a little bit. Spoiler alert, don't bother, it doesn't work right yet. But you can actually get it to work if you want. Anyway, so here is where I put that script. It is custom install fix. That is the name of the script. And you can run that script either by doing // and then, going to this directory and doing / like this, and then custom install script or custom install fix like that, and that will execute the script. The other thing you can do, I think, is just double click it, and you should get, maybe if you double click it might not like it because it's not an sh file. So instead we can do, I don't know if we actually have the ability to do execute. Yeah, I don't think so. So the other thing we can do is we can add it to our Steam library. Now that's a little bit tricky because if you just right click on it and do add to Steam, I don't think that's actually going to work functionally because it won't know what to do with it. So what we actually need to do, let me actually do this, and let's see, let's go here, and then I'm going to go over to my home directory, or my home, doesn't really matter, and then I'm going to go into here, and I'm going to go to, I named it update fix in the Steam library, that's why. Okay, so we're going to come in here, and I'm going to go to properties, and I don't think, yeah, I think this thing does this kind of jazz, which is not really what we want, but I want to hopefully show you this. Let's see. So yeah, what I've done is, yeah, okay. Can I copy what's in there? Let's see. Okay, well, let me do it this way then. Let's go back in there and I'll show you what I did. Okay, so you can add that script to your library if you want, and I'll do a video on how I do that motion, where I just go straight into this rather than running this from an actual switch to desktop thing, because yeah, I'm definitely running this on a nested session. That's kind of cool. So once you have your script set up and placed in whatever file you want to put it and named however you want to name it. In this case, I named it custom install fix, although I think in the Steam interface I shortened it to update fix. But anyway, the point is what you're going to do, or the easiest thing to do at this point, would be to first of all make sure that it is executable. So you're going to have to right click on it and then go to properties. And in properties, you can go over to permissions and then make sure is executable is checked. The other thing you can do is simply in the terminal do chmod +x and then custom install fix, and that will make it executable for you. So what we're going to do is we're going to right click on it and we're going to do add to Steam. Okay. And that should do custom install fix. Okay, so here, if we right click on this guy and go to properties, and then what we want to do is we want to take this target here and we want to change it. So what we want to do is we want to take this guy and we want to change him to be console -e bin user bin bash. I think it's -e. -e and then user bin bash, and then you want to do the path to your script. So in my case, that'll be the home directory, then deck, and then .local bin custom install fix. Okay, so do that. You can name it however you want. In my case, I think I named it update fix, but I'll leave this one custom install fix for now just so I can show you. And then go to launch options and paste that in. So here it is, by the way. If you just do an LD underscore preload like that in all caps equals %, command %. And then we're just going to exit out of that. And now if we execute it, we should see that those errors are gone. Yep, and now it just asks for a password. So that's correct. So that is how you set it up in Steam. And now if I reload into my other, my game mode or whatever, it will appear as a runnable script in there. And then what I recommend you do is hide the game. So if you do hide this game, this way it won't appear as a game in your list. So every time you run it, it won't show up. It does mean you'll have to search for it every time, but it's worth it, so it's not sitting there annoying you. And then there's actually a plugin that you can use as well in Decky Loader to run scripts or whatever. But I find it's just easier to just search for them if you know the name of what you put them as, and then it will make your life a lot better. So anyway, that is how you install it into Steam so that you can run it from your actual game mode. There's one other thing I can show you. So if you'll notice, I can press custom install fix here, and then press enter, and it will execute the script. I don't actually have to give it the full path or do // and that's because it's in that user local or that local bin, and that's because that's in my path. So if you do echo $path, if that doesn't work for you, echo this, and if you don't see this item inside of your path variable, then you're not going to get that that output. There are other places you can obviously put scripts in order for them to run, but unfortunately they are all in places that will be clobbered by the Steam Deck during operating system updates for the most part. So that's why I recommend doing the .local bin. Why do I recommend that setup specifically? Because that is how other distributions work. So if you go to a Debian distribution, you'll notice that you have a .local bin that's in there, and you can put applications in there, and it's a common location that people use for runtime libraries that they make themselves. Runtimes that they make themselves, or not runtime, sorry, binaries or executables that they make themselves is what I meant to say. Okay, and bin, by the way, is short for binary. That's what that is. So how do you get that in your path variable if it's not there? Because I can't remember if I added that, so I'll go ahead and show you. So you are probably using bash. I'm using ZSH, so I can show you in my ZSH. You would do .bash rc, most likely, if you're using bash as your terminal, or you'll do ZSH rc if you're using ZSH. And so in here, if I go all the way down to the bottom of the file, you'll see I've added this line here that says path without the $ equals $path. Note the casing, that's all caps, colon, and then tilde, which is short for the home directory. So use your home deck in this case, or you can just put home deck there if you prefer. And then I've done the .local bin. And what that does is it tells it anytime you, well, that actually specifically tells it to append that home deck local bin path to the end of your path variable. You don't want to do it without that $ path in there, because what that'll do is clobber your path and append it with, you know, the other thing, which you don't want. You want to keep your stuff in there and just add that little bit on the end. So what that's what that construct will do right there. Okay. So the other thing you need to do. So basically what that does is it allows for your system to look in that path when you type a command in. So if you type in a command and it can't find it, it'll start looking in the path variables locations for the command, and if it finds it, it will execute it. And so that's basically the gist of that. So if you've done everything in this video, congratulations, you have a pretty sick setup now, and you can absolutely do firewalls. This is going to be built upon later, and we're going to talk about how to do some other really cool security things down the line, maybe within the week if I am not lazy. But unfortunately, September is birthday hell month for me, and my family's just full of birthdays. So we'll see if I've got time. Hopefully I do. Yeah, well, that's it for me, guys. Thank you for watching. I hope you learned a lot as always, and I'll see you in the next video.